Yeah, so this is just a continuation. We'll be covering chapter 26. Yeah, the first recording covered chapter 25. So this will be focused on chapter 26. So the name of the chapter is Create Classes That Modify Their Subclasses. And still this is a continuation of the monkey patching and the method overriding plus the meta programming we've seen all throughout these previous like 4 or 5 chapters. So chapter 26 is the very last chapter in the meta programming section of Eloquent Ruby. And after that, we'll be looking at chapter 4, part 4, which is the very last part in the book. So here in this chapter, we have a problem, and that problem is that when you look at real world documents are not made up of strings. Like real world documents are made up of, like, they're more complex compared to what the definition of our current document class says they should be made up of. Because when you look at, now let's say, a Microsoft Word document, for that document, you can define the font name, you can define the font size, you can define the font emphasis, you can define so many things, the color of the text, you can underline. So what we are looking at here is that the document, or a real world document, has all those things, so many variations of the font. In addition to that, a document can have so many paragraphs. So you have some documents with 2 paragraphs, other documents with 3 paragraphs, and then other documents have so many paragraphs. Like now let's say you buy a new computer and you're looking at the instruction manual. That booklet has like so many paragraphs. And the fact that such a document can have all those many paragraphs is not defined for our current implementation of the document class. And this is what we are going to look at here. We are going to focus on how can we get a paragraph and then we add it to a document without repeating ourselves so much or writing a lot of redundant code. So this is page 318. We have a paragraph class. So this paragraph class, we can access the font name, and by access I mean we can retrieve the font name and we can also define the font name. So we have a font name, font size, font emphasis, as well as the text, because the paragraph is made up of text. And then we have an initialize method, and then a toString method. Then in addition to this, now we have
Are you showing that portion of code? Because I'm still seeing the end of chapter 25 on my screen.
oh, I'm sharing currently. Let me first stop the sharing, and then I share again. Can you see it now?
1 second, it's still transmitting information.
Okay.
I just see a black screen at the moment. No,
I don't know. On my end, it's sharing.
no, I just see a black screen right now.
Let me try again. How about now?
Still a black screen.
I don't know. I don't know what's happening, because on my end it's sharing. I don't know if you can just follow with your copy
Yeah,
because
let me
I don't
share
know
my
the issue.
screen. Oh, can you stop sharing yours?
Okay. Yeah, this the code on page 318. That's what I was referring to. So we have a paragraph class, and a paragraph contains text, but in addition to text, we can define a specific font, a specific font size for that paragraph, as well as a font emphasis for that paragraph. So we've created a paragraph class, and in addition to the paragraph class, we also have a structured document class. And what the structured document class is responsible for is that when you look at a given document has either one or two or many paragraphs. So depending on the specific document we are dealing with, we'll have a specific number of paragraphs. So you can think of a paragraph as being part of a structured document, which is why we define a structured document class. And inside the initialize method of this class, we can see that we have a title. In this case, the title of the structured document, the author or who wrote this structured document. And by structured document, I mean this could be a CV, this could be an instruction manual, or it could be like a book. So there are so many kinds of structured documents. Still inside the initialize method of the structured document, we also have paragraphs. We have an instance variable called paragraphs, and we assign this to an empty array. Because remember, we are going to get a paragraph when we create a new paragraph using the paragraph class we defined before. We're going to create a new paragraph. And then when we create that paragraph, we are going to add that paragraph to the to the already existing number of paragraphs. In this case, we use the empty array to be a storage for the paragraphs of that specific structured document. And yeah, that's it. So we have two classes, a paragraph class and a structured document class. So on page 319 at the very top, we try to create an example of a structured document, and this structured document is called RAS-CV. It's an instance of the structured document class. So we pass in the name of the structured document. In this case, it's a resume, and then we also pass in the author of the document. In this case, it's Russ Olsen, the author of the book, because this is his CV. Or that's kind of what we are trying to think about when we do this. So we pass in the name of the structured document. The document is a resume, and then we pass in the name of the author or the initials of the author. And then inside this block, we say we create several paragraphs, of which we add these paragraphs to our what? To our structured document. So when we create a new paragraph, we pass in the font. For example, the font type is Nimbus. The font size is 15. We make it bold. And then we also pass in the text of that particular paragraph. So here, we've created a structured document and we've added 3 paragraphs to it. And now I'm reading from the book. Armed with the newfound power of the structured document class, we can build all sorts of specialized documents, everything from resumes to instructions for installing an LCD TV. So before I proceed, the structured document, you can think of the structured document class as the class from which all these specialized kind of documents are going to be inheriting from. For example, a resume will be inheriting from the structured document class. Same goes for instructions. Same goes for a book, for example. So you can think of a resume, an instruction manual, a book as subclasses of the structured document class. And this kind of relation between the two is going to be very important if we are trying to understand how to implement the metaprogramming techniques to solve the problem we're going to look at. So subclassing is sometimes hard to do. This is the next section. We have a class. The name of the class is resume. And like I've said, all these specialized documents inherit from the structured document. So we have the class resume inheriting from the structured document class. So what we are trying to do here is that we are trying to define all these instance methods inside the resume class, so that if a user is trying to create a new resume, they'll have these instance methods available for them, so that they don't have to go through a lot of trouble, for example, to add a name to a resume, to add an address to a resume, or to add an email to a resume, or their work experience, for example, to a resume. So the code at the very bottom of page 319 is just trying to make it easy for someone creating a resume to have access to these instance methods. The instance methods are named name, address, email, and so on. So we look at how we can use these newly defined instance methods that are defined inside the resume class to create a new resume. So now I'm on page 320. We have an instance of a resume class called CV. We pass in the name of the structured document. It's a resume. Then we pass in the author. Of course, it's still Rust. And then inside this block, we can just say cv.name. We pass in the name. We say cv.address. We pass in the address. And then cv.email. We pass in the email. So what we are trying to do here is that everything that needs to be added to this newly defined resume, we can write it out inside this block, so that it's easy for us to add all these things at once to the resume. The same kind of thinking applies when you're creating an instructions document. For an instructions document, still you're inheriting from the structured document class. So you'll have methods like introduction, because an instruction manual has an introduction. You'll have a warning method. You'll have a step method. And what we're doing here is that introduction, warning, and step will all add paragraphs to this instructions manual. And this is where we see that this thing keeps on it gets like repetitive quite fast. Inside the instructions class, we have methods, like for example the introduction method. But when you look at the code inside each of these methods, it's the same, with a few variations, of course, whereby now for a specific paragraph you can define a different kind of font or a different font size, as well as the text will be different. But when you look at the code inside, the code inside basically does two things. You create a new instance of the paragraph class, and then you add that paragraph to self, of which self is the instruction manual you're dealing with, or the instruction manual you're creating. And this is where the redundancy comes in. So we are trying to figure out a way to use metaprogramming such that we don't have to write out all these instance methods by hand, and so that we do away with all this repetition. And this is where the solution comes in: class methods that build instance methods. Nelson, are we there?
Yeah. Class methods that build instance
Yeah,
methods.
yeah, up until that point. So class methods that build instance methods. You want to have a class method that is defined inside a class, and this class method is going to build an instance method that you need on the fly to add a given paragraph to a given document. Now you have an instructions class here, and still it inherits from the structured document class. So you have a paragraph type. Paragraph type is paragraph type is let me see. Paragraph type is basically a method that takes the name of the paragraph we are trying to add to the instructions document. And then in addition to that, it also takes an options hash, of which the options hash contains a font name, a font size, as well as the font emphasis. And this is what we are trying to have as the final version of our paragraph type, such that whether we define this paragraph type inside a resume class, or we've defined it inside a book class, of which all these classes inherit from structured document, you can have methods built for you that you'll need as you keep on adding paragraphs to the specific document you're dealing with. So instead of you, in this case, writing def, you define a method called introduction, and then you create a new instance of that paragraph. You can just do this and have the meta programming take care of building that method for you. So you just end up using the method instead of you having to hard code it. So I'm going to skip to the solution. Okay, let me go step by step. Page 321, at the very bottom, you have a class structured document. Inside this class, we define a class method called paragraph type. Paragraph type method is going to take the paragraph name as well as the options. Because remember, I talked about this kind of method having an options hash, of which the options hash will be storing the font name, the value of the font name, the value of the font size, and the value of the font emphasis. Paragraph name in this case will refer to the name of the method you want to be generated for you. For the above case of the instructions manual, that will be the introduction method. For the case of the resume, that could be the name method or the address method or the email method. So when you look at this code here, the code on page 322, you're trying to figure out how to write this logic such that the method name is dynamically generated for you. And what the author says here is that you can't use the def keyword, which you usually use for defining a new method, simply because when you use a def keyword, you'll have to hard code the name of the method yourself. And remember, we are trying to do away with the hard coding. So you can't just use the def keyword to define the method you want to use. And reading from that section, unfortunately, that is not going to work. The trouble with the familiar def statement is that we have the name of the method we are trying to create in the name parameter, but def requires an explicit. You type it right here. You type the method name right after the def keyword. In other words, we have the name of the new method data, but def wants it as code. And now on to the solution. The way around this roadblock is to make use of class eval. Built into all Ruby classes, the class eval method takes a string and evaluates it as if it were code that appeared in the class body. This is exactly what we need. We'll just build a string that contains the code for the new method definition, and then class eval will turn the new method into a reality. So we have the structured document class, and inside this class, we define a class method called paragraph type. Paragraph type takes two arguments, the name and then the options. So first and foremost, we'll extract the name, the font name, the font size, and the emphasis from this options hash. And what we do here is that if the options hash contains the font name, you get that font name that is in the options hash, and then you assign it to the variable name. If the options hash doesn't have a font name, you just use Arial as the default font name. Same goes for the size, same goes for the emphasis. So we check the options hash. Does the options hash have a font size? Yes. If it has, if you've checked and the font size is present, you assign the font size you've retrieved to the size variable. If the font size is not present inside the options hash, you just use the default font size, which is 12. And now we have a variable named code, and we assign it to a string, this percentage q, and then you open the brackets. This is syntax for creating a string in Ruby. We looked at it in the very first chapters. So inside these brackets we have def, and then we pass in, this is string interpolation, we pass in the paragraph name. This paragraph name, or what is going to be end up being filled there, is the name of the method you want to be built for you. That could be an introduction method, a name method, an email method, and of course this will depend on the document you're dealing with. So you have paragraph name, you fill it in with string interpolation, and then this method will take an argument of text. Then after that, we'll create a new instance of the paragraph class, and still we are using string interpolation to fill in the name of the font name, the size, the emphasis, as well as the text, because this is a paragraph. A paragraph should have text. And then after creating that instance, we add that paragraph to self. And since we are inside the structured document class, self will be equal to the class we are dealing with, in this case, the structured document class. And then we close off with the end keyword and then the brackets. So after that, we are going to say class eval, and then we pass in the code, we pass in the string. And this is where the magic happens. This class eval method is going to execute the string inside here and create that method for you. So you won't have to write it by yourself inside the structured document class. And if you've taken note, when we create a new instance of the paragraph class, this is the kind of logic we had for each of those individual methods when writing them out. We would create a new instance of the paragraph class, and then we'd add that paragraph to the what? To the current document we are dealing with. So this kind of logic is extracted out, or is similar to the kind of logic that was present for each of those individual methods. And now to test it out. So if you have an instructions class that inherits from structured document, and then you have inside it, you're calling paragraph type, you're passing in the introduction, because remember, paragraph type takes a paragraph name. In this case, it will be the introduction. And then we pass in our options. Our options are the font name, the font size, and the font emphasis. What we are going to end up with, or the method we are going to end up, the method Ruby is going to generate for us because of this code will be similar to what you see below, the introduction method you see below. So you have the name of the method as introduction. It takes one argument as text. And then you inside that method, you create a new instance of the paragraph class, and then you add that paragraph to self. And here, simply because this operation is happening inside the instructions class, self will be the instructions class as opposed to the structured document. Because remember, we are performing this operation inside the instructions class and not the structured document class. Nelson,
Yes.
I don't know if everything is clear up to that point, or if you have anything you want to.
Uh, I mean, no, it's very, very interesting. This whole create a string and then eval that code to create to generate this new code. Super interesting.
Yeah, so I can continue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very first solution to our problem uses class eval. And we've seen that class eval basically executes a string and dynamically generates the method you need to perform your operation on the fly. We look at another slightly different solution still to the same problem. And this is better method creation with define method. So although creating new methods by class evaling a string has a certain clarity to it, if nothing else, you can print out the screen and actually see the method that you are defining. It is really not ideal. We generally like to avoid evaluate some code on the fly type methods if there is a more normal API alternative. In the case of defining a new method, there's definitely an alternative, one with the very obvious name of define method. To use define method, you call it with the name of the new method and a block. Because remember, at the end of the day, we are trying to create a method. So the name of the method will be equal to that the method that relates the name that relates to that specific operation you're trying to perform. You end up with a new method with a given name that will execute the block when called. Conveniently, the parameters of the block become the parameters of the new method. Thus, we can reformulate paragraph type using define method very easily. So inside the structured document class, paragraph type is still a class method and it takes the paragraph name as well as the options. The extraction happens whereby you check for the presence of a given option, and if the option is present, you assign it to the variable name. If it's not present, you use the default value. In which case, if it's the font name, that will be Arial. If it's the size, it will be a font size of 12. So after that, now define method comes in. So you say define method, you pass in the paragraph name as the argument. If you're trying to generate a method named introduction, the paragraph name will be introduction. And then now onto the block, you pass in the text. And then inside this block, you'll create a new instance of the paragraph method. You pass in the name, the font name, the size, the emphasis, and the text. And then you add that paragraph to self, of which self will be the structured document class, because this operation is happening inside the structured document class. Either way you do it, you end up with a method in the superclass that can add methods to its subclasses. You also have a very powerful technique for creating custom classes with very little effort. So if you were to check what define method returns, let's say if you want it to write for you the introduction method, this is exactly the same thing you're going to end up with what we saw on the previous page. You're going to end up with def introduction, which takes an argument of text, and inside you create a new instance of the paragraph class and add that paragraph to self. So it's kind of two different solutions to the same problem, one using class eval and the other using define method. So the modification sky is the limit. And what we are saying here is that inside the structured document class, we can make the content of a specific document to be private such that we can't access it. And the code on page 3 to 5, we create a bank statement class which inherits from structured document class, and then we create a paragraph type of bad news. And then after that, we call privatize. And remember, privatize is a class method that is defined in the structured document class. Excuse me. So when we try to get the contents of a bank statement, first and foremost, we'll have to create a new bank statement instance. After that, we call bad news, because remember, bad news is the name of the method that has been generated for us, and it takes an argument of text. So you call the bad news method on the instance of the bank statement class, which is named statement, passing in the text as the argument. So when you say put statement.content, you're going to end up with an error, and that error is going to tell you private method content called for bank statement. Because remember, inside bank statement, we call privatize, and privatize is a class method that was defined in the structured document class that makes the content method to be private. So when you try to call a private method outside a class, this is the kind of thing you'll run into. In addition to that, you can also tell someone that a given document is confidential and they can't access its content. Quoting the page on 326, you define a disclaimer class method inside the structured document class. And then you also modify the privatize class method such that when someone when privatize is called for a given instance of a document, and that person is not allowed access to that document, you can have this string returned to them which says this document is a deep dark secret, which means that they don't have access to that document. And you'll see this in action. You create a new bank statement class. Inside it, you call paragraph type. You pass in bad news as the name of the method you want generated for you. And then at the end, you call privatize. So when you call the disclaimer class method on bank statement, you're going to have the output. This document is a deep, dark secret, which means that you can't access it. So yeah, now into the wild. Nelson, is everything okay?
Yeah, the so um so far this all of this has been uh modifications to methods. Um but my mind is stuck on that class eval thing that we did previously because um I'm wondering how much you can put into class eval. Um so when we no, we've gone too far. I'm trying to find class eval again. Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's there.
here,
It's there. Yeah.
so when we defined this code here, um, and then we ran it through class eval, um, it takes in a string and evaluates it as if it were code that appeared in the class body. But I'm wondering if you could define classes this way. Um, like I really am not sure. So let's check RI class eval. Like, I'm wondering if you can create classes this way. I wonder what the limits are. Can you create modules? Can you create classes? Or is this just a way of defining methods?
Oh, there's a module equivalent. I think it's called module eval. And then there's also an instance eval, which creates, I think, singleton methods. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
there are two other equivalents of the eval method.
Yeah, uh I'm gonna have to play around with that a little bit more. Because I'm super curious about how far you can push it. Okay, so where were we? Staying out of trouble? No.
Yeah, but the time is almost done.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think in the wild, one of the examples of this kind of thing is the accessor method that we've been using all along, attribute accessor. Yeah, I think I'll just breeze through these, but they use the same principle. And then there's also something about forwardable, but the time is done.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna stop sharing here.
Okay.